I think the biggest thing that we have to do is get on the ground. We have to talk to people that we have not talked to in the past. Dems are overperforming by 13 points in most races. If that were the case, we're going to flip seats and break the supermajority.
I'm on this big kick right now, like compete, because good things will come from competing in ways that staying out of the arena will certainly not.
For sure. There should be 124 Democrats on the ballot.
In 2026, write the vision right. And make it plain, Phil Ford.
Every single person in South Carolina should have access to their elected official. If they don't give you access, I say make it.
I know that people like you are on the inside and we're playing this game of pass the baton. And if we can do that effectively, we always have more of a shot of pushing back against the extreme bills.
That's where I say, all right, you've got 24 hours to be pissed. You've got 24 hours to be sad, whatever that emotion is, and then back to it the next day because people are counting on you. We have 1 in 6 people in South Carolina going hungry. Let's meet these basic needs of people, and then we can talk about everything else.
Politics is actually the one arena where you raise your hand and somebody will put you to work.
I think it's heavy what we're doing and what we're going through right now. But if more people show up, the lift is lighter for everyone.
Welcome to the Great Ships podcast. My name is Taylor Culliver. I am your host, and this is a show about the people navigating the real currents of power, politics, and possibility in South Carolina, not from the headlines, but from the day-to-day work of shaping what's possible in our communities and across the state. As we close out the year, we're recording this on the eve of Christmas Eve. I wanted to pause and take stock of what happened this year. What happened at the State House, the legislation that was passed or the legislation that got held up, who benefited across the state and who didn't, and why, and how do we make sense of this moment as we're looking ahead to 2026. And to help us do that, I have brought in none other than the incredible Phil Ford. Phil is a founding partner of the Ford & Ford Group, one of South Carolina's most respected government relations and public affairs firms. And for decades, Phil has worked alongside advocates and organizations trying to move the needle in a state where progress is often slow and contested and hard-won. What makes Phil a compelling voice here isn't just his proximity to all of the people who are working really hard to pass laws in the state, but it's his own staying power. Year after year, through wins and losses, Phil himself continues to show up to do the slog of legislative influence because he believes that this work really matters. And I am super honored that he said yes to having a conversation with me and have gotten to know Phil over the past couple of years and just know him to be a man that literally everywhere across the state, he is well respected for the work that he does and for who he is as a person. And so in this conversation, we're going to look back at the 2025 legislative year, what we gained, what was lost, and what it meant for South Carolina and South Carolinians. And we'll also look ahead to the 2026 legislative session and talk honestly about what's coming, where opportunities exist, and what this moment is asking of each of us. And so, Phil, I am really, really glad you're here. Welcome to Great Ships, and let's get rolling.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Meeting you just a couple of years ago, I'm so proud of everything that you've done since 2024 and continuing to stay in the fight, because that's what really makes the difference, right? So and for that intro of me, your check is in the mail. Thank you so much.
I'm always happy to be your spokesperson. Absolutely. I didn't even get into like the weeds on all the stuff that you've done. We're going to do that during the conversation. So why don't you start by just sharing with me and with the audience, like, how do you describe what you do to the everyday person?
Yeah, I just tell people, I work to make South Carolina a better place for all people. And when they kind of give a follow-up question, what does that look like? Making sure people have access to the things that they need to thrive. Making sure that they have access to housing, making sure that they have access to nutritious food, making sure that they have their civil rights, making sure that they will be allowed to be themselves in their community. And that's kind of how I go about it. Sometimes I am a registered lobbyist, but sometimes folks have a negative connotation with with that word, thinking that, we have influence in a negative way. I don't look at it that way, particularly for the clients that I work with. I work with nonprofit clients to make sure South Carolina is more equitable, more diverse, and those folks and others have what they need.
Mm. So let's rewind. And what I like to do with the show is actually get a little bit of like personal story and perspective before we get into the weeds of the work, right? And so I want to know, how did you find your way into this kind of work in the first place? What motivates you and inspires you? How long you been up to stuff like this? And where's it come from?
Yeah. So my parents were always politically um, engaged, not necessarily involved though. So we would always watch the presidential debates when I was younger. We would, my parents were always in touch, and my mom, um, she always wrote letters to our elected officials, those types of things about issues that she really cared about. But the first time I ever myself got involved in politics, I was 5. And
That's
I
pretty
remember
early.
s it was, but I remember, seeing a debate, with Bill Clinton, and I must have told my mom, because she had written letters to elected officials, "I wanna write a letter too." So I wrote a letter to then Governor Bill Clinton, and wrote a letter telling him I hope he wins, drew a picture of him, Hillary, Chelsea, and socks, uh and got a letter back. That framed letter that I got back was on my parents' wall in the living room for years, and it's something that I still hold dear to me. But my parents always taught me that to whom much is given, much is expected, and I've had a very privileged life, growing up with 2 parents who were, small business owners. They had to work hard, don't get me wrong, but I grew up privileged. I went to private school, but that's not everybody's experience, and that's what my parents really taught me, is that my experience um, is not one that everybody has the privilege of having growing up. They taught me to give back, and they taught me to work hard, you know, by the time I was 12 years old, I had my own little shop at the flea market in Orangeburg selling hats and sunglasses and T-shirts because I wanted to wear the Abercrombie or American Eagle jeans instead of, the maybe the Walmart jeans that my parents got me, right? And they were like, "Well, if you want these name brand things, you're gonna have to work hard for it
Yeah.
yourself." But, before I could drive, at 14, started my first internship on a campaign. It was for a sheriff's race in Orangeburg, and I started out answering phones. And by the time it was over, I was organizing sign waving on street corners and helping do ethics reports. So I got tossed in pretty early, and it's kind of like a bug that bites you, and just the itch just stays. And it just kind of kept going from there. Every 2 years, I was volunteering on a campaign or at a nonprofit organization, and now that brings me to where I am today.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about your story and so many others is just, a lot of people will ask the question, like, how do I get involved? I don't know what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And politics is actually the one arena where you raise your hand and somebody will put you to work, right? Like, you can volunteer, you can find opportunity to dig your feet in. And from there, really the sky kind of becomes the limit, right? Like, you've taken interest in a debate for when you were 5 to working on your first campaign at 14, and now you're in the state house most weeks of the year, helping to craft legislation, right, and helping to move the state in a really positive direction. And so your story, like so many others, really just reminds me, like, it's getting involved is actually all about just taking the first step when it comes to politics, and you don't really need a whole ton of connections or anything like that to start getting your foot in the door.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you a story from 2010. I was out in, Hawaii doing, managing the field work for a US congressional campaign, and it was actually one of 3 that flipped from Republican to Democrat that year. 2010 was a really tough election for Democrats nationally, with, at that point, the Tea Party, which I
Mhm.
kinda long for these days. Put that in a bucket for a later conversation. But, I had a volunteer that, that came in and was like, "I wanna do something to help." So I was like, "Phone calls are the priority right now." So we started on phone calls. After a day or 2 of doing that, she was like, "Phone calls aren't for me." "Alright, well, we've got a canvas coming up on Saturday. Let's go knock some doors." That wasn't it either. So I said, "Well, let's give her, over to the finance team because they need help with invitations for fundraisers." That wasn't really it either. And I was like, "Never had this trouble before." Um, but because and to be fair, most people would have just walked away. But she said, "No, I'm gonna keep coming back, and I'm gonna tell you, this isn't working for me, but what else you got?" So
Mhm.
I appreciate that level of commitment. But eventually she loved to cook, and we had lots of volunteers making phone calls from, 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock in the evening, and she came and made dinner once a week, for people, and that was something, like a family dinner, and it was just really great, and I say that story to say, if you step up, we will find a place. And we will find a place that you're comfortable in, because not everybody's comfortable in more public facing things, right? So, that's one story that I hold dear, and tell people quite often that, it doesn't have to look the way that I do it. It can be your way, and we wanna help you, find that way.
Yeah, well, and there's more than enough work to do, right? So
That's for
it's like,
sure.
we got a long way to go. So in the slog, right, of all of that work, I just wonder, how are you making sense of this moment right now? Like, what stands out to you, particularly? I know there's a lot happening at the national level, obviously, and we can make connections to that at the state level. But I'm particularly with South Carolina. Like, how are you making sense of where we're at and what's going on?
Taylor, I don't know. To just be honest, I've been doing this a long time, uh, and it has become one of the most divisive and frankly nastiest political environments I've seen in a long time. Years ago, we would have said, South Carolina is different. There's more respect in our General Assembly than other places, especially than in Congress. But now that the Freedom Caucus has gotten a hold of several seats, many seats, over a dozen seats in our state, um, the nastiness has just exploded. I mean, there are, you know, uh, resolutions to censure members for just speaking their mind and speaking an opinion, and I've never seen that before. And it's seeing some of the national connections to issues, um, around pronouns or bathrooms or abortion, where we just saw a massive fight in South Carolina. It has really, the pendulum has swung a little too far in South Carolina, and I think eventually that pendulum will swing back, right?
Okay.
And I think we saw that in the 2025 elections that, have put or should have put folks on notice, where and nationally, where, Dems are overperforming by 13 points in most races. If that were the case, we're gonna flip seats and break the supermajority.
Yeah, so you think that
Uh,
that's possible in 26?
100%. Candidates will just have to, work hard, knock as many doors as possible, have volunteers make as many phone calls as possible, um, and talk to people. That's one thing that we did with the abortion debate. We didn't leave anyone off the table. We talked to probably more Republican voters in South Carolina than Dems. And
You mean this past kind of this past fight that happened this fall?
yep,
Okay,
yep.
gotcha.
I mean, we were doing radio on conservative radio stations on during our former Republican Lieutenant Governor's talk show, Kennard's talk show. We had radio ads talking about the harms, knowing who the audience was and uh, perfecting the message for those people.
Mhm.
And look, we saw one of the sponsors of S323 not even vote
Right.
on it. So I say all that to say that we have to expand who we talk to. Let's not just talk to people who we're comfortable talking to, and really communicate with them in ways that they can understand.
Yeah, it strikes me you said a little bit about the messaging, like tailoring that messaging around the abortion debate to the audience that you were trying to reach. I wonder what that means in practice, right? Like, how are you talking to Republicans about abortion in the extreme ways that was trying to get passed through the Senate versus a Democrat or someone who's more pro life than not?
Yeah. So a couple of the ways were criminalization of pregnancy outcomes. Right? Where, I mean, we've seen it here in my hometown in Orangeburg, where, a college student was initially charged, um, with a crime because of a miscarriage, and we're seeing it nationally. So talking about, the criminalization aspect was a huge piece. And then the other is just the realistic piece of when you put abortion bans with 0 exceptions in them, there will be 12 and 13-year-olds that will be assaulted, likely by someone that they know, and not have access to reproductive care, to abortion. And that is, in essence, re victimizing them as the state. I'm not allowing them the autonomy and as a victim to make the choices that they need to make for their own recovery or survivorship. So those were a couple of things that we really, hit home on in radio ads, postcards to, moderate white women in all 9 of those districts, and phone calls. We just kept hammering it, every way that we could.
Yeah, and it feels like, I'm taking this abortion debate just because we brought it up. It feels like that's one that's maybe not going away. Like it keeps coming back up. And so do you feel like we're at this point where if we can just continue to hold the line, like that's about as much as we're going to get and we can't let them kind of slip into a more extreme bill? Or is there any room to get to, 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks? Like just tell me kind of where you're seeing room to play offense versus, are people who believe in some form of abortion access, are we going to be on this defensive for the foreseeable future?
I think until we can win some seats, Taylor, honestly, the way that it works in the Senate is that if one member objects to a bill, it kinda gets put to the end of the calendar. So, it's kinda like a filibuster. Um, but, I think we have to win some seats. But when we had conversations with Republican members about the abortion ban, they really understood it. And then once they started getting the phone calls from their constituents, they felt the pressure to do something, right? Rather than just
Yeah.
letting, an extreme senator like Richard Cash run run the ship.
Right. Well, that speaks to me to the importance of the work that you do, right? Because we don't all have direct access to talk one on one with a legislator who's deciding how they're going to vote for this bill. But what it sounds like you're telling me is because you're able to have those conversations directly with some of these legislators, and then the public like backs you up and affirms the things that you're saying, that is really the system working the way that, I mean, clearly the vote didn't pass. And so that's the system working in best form, is kind of some people on the inside doing the insider work like you do, and then really having the backing of the public. Because I don't think people always understand, right? Sometimes it feels like actions are kind of like going into the void. And so I think helping people make the connection between why this matters is because I've had the conversation to this senator and I know where he's at, but I need you to speak up because he's the one you're gonna like, who's really gonna punch the ticket home.
10%. That's exactly it. You know, spending as much time up there, when I get to see those reports back of how many people made those phone calls, or how many people sent those uh, postcards or knocked on those doors, it gets me excited when I see solid numbers. And sometimes all it will take is 5, 6 calls to a senator's office and really explaining the issues that they have with a piece of legislation. I do believe, though, that every single person in South Carolina should have access to their elected official. It's
You
not
would
always the
hope.
case, right? If they don't give you access, I say make it. At the end of the day, um, you know, I've sent text messages, I've made phone calls, I've gone to, their offices, I stand, at the ropes, kind of the barrier to the chambers. Sometimes I don't have access to members, but when I do have the opportunity, I make that access, right? And that's something that I pride myself on, is that I will run across the campus of the state house if I see a member of the General Assembly that I need to talk to. So create that access, show up, I think is a big piece. And folks like folks like me, if you come into the lobby and you're like, "Hey, I'm trying to get um, Senator XYZ, um, but he's not responding," I always shoot in a text message or show how to send in a message through the official channel, or say when they come out to talk to somebody else, I'll point them out. I'll
Hmm.
say, "That's him. Go and stand right there, and before he can walk off, uh,
This is how you do
introduce
it.
yourself. Stick your hand out and introduce yourself." Um, so you know, yeah, that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds. I'm getting really kind of inspired and energized about that, just because I know that people like you are on the inside and we're playing this kind of game of pass the baton, right? And if we can do that effectively, we always have more of a shot of pushing back against the extreme bills like the abortion bans and others. We talked a little bit, and I want to circle back to it, right? Around like um putting people on notice, right? And so some of that ability for us to interact more deeply and intentionally with our legislators and our lawmakers is that they feel like they have to be beholden to the public. And a big part of why many legislators in South Carolina feel that they don't have to is because of the kind of electoral makeup, the gerrymandering, so many seats that go uncontested, right? Like even, last year when I ran for state senate against Ross Turner, before then, I swear to you, Ross Turner would maybe engage on his Facebook like once every 4 years. And not that I was like highly competitive in that race, but because of what we did through my campaign, I do believe it lit a fire under him to say, you got to communicate a little bit more with the people because they need to hear from you more. And now if you go to his Facebook, he's talking pretty regularly to people and engaging with voters in a much better way, personally, I would say, than what he was before. And so I say all that to say, you said we got to win seats. And I really want people to understand what becomes different if we break the supermajority in 2026? What does that give Democrats the ability to do? What does that do for Republican kind of power and influence? Can you help us make sense of, just like when we say break the supermajority, I get that in practice, it sounds good for a headline. What does that actually mean for what's possible and how laws can get passed?
Yeah, so changes to our Constitution. If there are two-thirds majority of both chambers, they can, put something on the ballot, right? Um, you know, changing the order in which bills come up. They can put things on special order on their calendars, changing rules, those types of things. And that would be such a huge win. And I say the word win. Let me backtrack just a second. There are different definitions of win, right? And I think what you did was you won for the people of the district because their representative is talking to people more. And I saw that during the S 323 fight, that he was much more responsive to folks emailing him about the issue. And I think that's a huge win, right? But to go back to your point, if we are able to flip 6 seats, then in the House in 2026, then we um, don't risk them changing our constitution to prohibit DEI initiatives or the definition of their their very narrow definition of gender, those types of things um, from our state constitution.
Yeah. And effectively, like, Democrats in the state house are not really a part of the conversation, right? Like, top like it just feels to me like we're so far removed from having any form of real kind of like power influence, unless I guess there's a lot of kind of collaboration on a particular bill, right? It just feels like we're kind of in the void in the state house side of things. Is that fair? Am I not describing that well?
I don't think so. I think there are members. Every member just has one vote. Did some of them vote in blocks? Yeah, for sure. But I think there particularly will be an opportunity if we do flip those 6 seats next year that the Freedom Caucus and the Democrats can uh, foil some things.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, there have been many times that having Dem members, um, like Heather Bauer, Beth Bernstein, Jermaine Johnson, those folks, and now I'm naming folks, and I'm like, oh, but what about this issue that I've worked with them on, like the Annie McDaniels and John Kings, that say, you know what, I'm gonna fight tooth and nail, and even if we don't have the numbers, we're getting things on the record for a lawsuit.
Hmm.
We're getting, particularly for me as a openly queer person in South Carolina, seeing them fight for LGBTQ plus people, um, even though I know the numbers are against us, is a win because that's affirmation, especially for young people,
Yeah.
right? That they see elected officials fighting for them. And, the outcome should never define someone's worth or their ability to live a happy life. Um, Sometimes they want to make it more difficult for us, but I would say that Dems um, need to show more fight, but they've been fighting.
Yeah. Oh,
And the Dems in the
totally.
Senate, Brad Hutto, and Dion
Yes.
Tedder and Senator Sabb, I mean, really put on a show
Hmm. Yeah.
for S323. So that's how it's done.
Totally. Yeah. Just to be clear, right? Like I know that there are individuals fighting really hard. I think in terms of like the lawmaking and the legislation, right? Like where can Democrats actually affect change and affect the legislation? Feels like with being in the super minority right now, that just feels like a harder kind of push. And so flipping these 6 seats is actually really critical, not only because it takes away Republicans' ability to do some of the things you talked about, but also just strengthening the muscle of the kind of democratic apparatus in the state house and giving some more oomph behind their ability to fight on behalf of the people. Is that
Yeah, for sure. And
okay?
another thing that I've seen more recently is, some Dems working with Republicans, and it doesn't. And what I'm proud of is of these members, and something that I uh, live with too is I don't care whose name is on it, who gets the
Hmm.
credit, as long as people are being helped, right? So I've seen members say, "Hey, if I sponsor this, it's pretty much dead. But if you sponsor this, we can get it done." And so there's that too. When we have strong Democrats that can build relationships regardless of party, I think that can happen too.
Yeah, yeah. And something else I heard from you really is like compete, right? Like even the competition is a form of win because it forces them to look at things differently or to play a hand differently or to be more engaged with their constituents. And so I'm on this big kick right now, like compete, compete, compete. Because good things will come from competing in ways that staying out of the arena will certainly not.
For sure. There should be 124 Democrats on the ballot.
In
And
2026, write the
that's right.
vision and make it plain, Phil Ford.
That's
Oh,
right.
cool. So walk me through 2025. What are some of the things that you consider kind of big wins for the people of South Carolina? And I name that specifically because I don't really put you in a bucket of like Dem Republican, right? Like I think you really do go into your work wanting to work with whichever legislative body or entity or person is willing to do right by the people. And so just walk me through kind of what are y'all seeing as 2025 wins and what kind of got left on the table that you wished we had kind of pushed harder on or that we still have work to do.
Yeah. So and to that point, I work closely with a lot of Republican legislators. I did run in 2024 as a Democrat, so it's no real secret of my political affiliation. I also speak Republican. So, the passage of S 425 was sponsored by Senator Tom Davis, a Republican down in Beaufort, that made school meal access, a priority, and it eliminated school meal shaming, where we would see meals thrown away or substandard meals. So, that bill was codified this year, which is a huge win. Movement on paid parental leave is another big win. Something that we have seen trickle down from the state. They didn't finish it at the state, hate crimes legislation, but what we're starting to see are hate intimidation ordinances at the county level. So even those wins coming from the state, and I'm uh, extremely proud of my friend Councilwoman Letitia Walker for fighting for that in Orangeburg, where we have such a rich civil rights history here. But those types of things, disinfectant being the best, uh, or sunlight being the best disinfectant. The streaming of school board meetings was another big win for transparency in our state, especially when we're starting to see Moms for Liberty at the local level really infiltrate and try to influence things on the local level. But there are a lot of things that didn't uh, uh, happen, right? Um, some bills that I am working on are the hate crimes bill, uh, better access to physical activity and physical education for our kiddos. Our state is really experiencing obesity at rates that and other chronic illnesses that we have never experienced. And our state is spending billions of dollars a year to treat those issues. So making sure that we institute healthy lifestyles for people early on in school. That did pass the House, but didn't get across the finish line in the Senate yet. Um, but things that we're facing challenges that we're facing coming up this year are uh, efforts to restrict DEI and fair contracting practices with the state. I know up up in Greenville, where you're at, Wendell Jones, Representative Jones, is really taking this head on and has said, "All right, we're going to fight this, but I'm going to propose a bill as well that will make things fairer
Yeah.
for folks." So I think that's really great. I think we're going to continue to see restrictive abortion bans. Um, for those folks, it's never enough, right? They'll keep coming back to the trough, if you will, to continue to take people's rights away. I think we're going to see bans on uh, bathroom access for people. And something that a lot of people don't really realize, Taylor, is that this also hurts cisgender people.
Hmm.
You know, a cisgender guy with long hair going into the men's bathroom, is he going to be questioned? Cis woman with short hair, um, will she be questioned? How will they be questioned? Is it just looking at an ID, or is it invasive searches of their person? And these are all things that are legitimate because we've seen assaults happen, right? So we're going to see foolishness like that in our state house this year, as well as continued voting rights um, uh, uh, attacks. I think with Governor McMaster meeting with White House officials about redistricting, I think we're in for a heavy 2026 in the legislative session, and that's why we have to be ready by June and then November.
Yeah. Yeah. We got a lot of work to do. I mean,
Yep.
it strikes me, right, that a lot of what you've named and a lot of even what I saw in the Republican House agenda that they unveiled around family, freedom, affordability, like most of what they're naming for me does not feel like they're prioritizing the kind of deepest needs of people across the state. And I just wonder, one of the things that I long for, right, is like, what's the alternative? Like, what paint us the alternative vision for what could be. And I haven't necessarily seen that from the Democratic House caucus, but I just wonder if you were kind of fighting for things that you felt like these things would make South Carolina much better across the board for people who really need it and for kind of everyday workers, et cetera. Like, what are the things that you feel like we should be focused on?
We have 1 in 6 people in South Carolina going hungry.
Mm,
That's a basic need.
yeah.
To be healthy, to be able to work, to be able to go to school, right? Housing is another piece that we have to do better on. Particularly with folks who have been passing homes down generationally, making sure that they don't lose their homes to gentrification and to increase property taxes once the title gets cleared, right? Those types of things. Basic needs of people is, I think we're still missing the boat of, let's meet these basic needs of people, and then we can talk about everything else. Roads. Our roads are still a disaster. One of my girlfriends from DC is down here visiting right now, and she was like, "Phil, I drove down Virginia to North Carolina. Okay, not much of a difference. But when I crossed over that state line in my new car, I felt like I was going to have to get an alignment within the first 10 minutes."
And
So
embarrassing. It's just embarrassing.
I'm just like, I'm like, I get it. Like, but we're not focusing on the safety net programs and frankly safety of people. And that's where I would like to see things headed. And I'll tell you, I if there were, if we went back to the real definitions of little L liberal, little C conservative, I'm probably a little C conservative. Uh, you know, uh, less government in my bedroom, my doctor's office, my wallet, unless it's taking care of people, right? And I think the Republicans here have um, now become liberals, wanting larger government, and getting into bathroom stalls and getting into doctors' offices and those types of things where I think we've kind of missed the mark um, in South Carolina.
Yeah. I mean, how do we get out of this? Right? Like I keep kind of naming the only way out is through because that's what it feels like. We're just in it and we gotta get through. But like what's the path, man? Like I have a lot of hope, I think, for 2026. I think if we can get more and more people to run for office in their local elections, like county council and school board and county commissions, along with state house seats, if we can kind of galvanize people to really kind of wake up and get energized around, an alternative vision for their local community or the state, that's one way. But it feels like we're in this for a while. And so how do you think about that in terms of the work that you do, your own mindset? What keeps you hopeful? How do you keep showing up every day in the midst of what feels to me like, man, this is rough?
It is rough, and there are nights that I come back home and cry, where I'm either pissed off or frustrated or sad. But I often think about the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., where the measure of a man is not where he is in times of comfort or convenience, but where he is in times of challenge and controversy. I kind of messed it up a little bit there. So, but that's where I say, all right, you've got 24 hours to be pissed. You've got 24 hours to be sad, whatever that emotion is, and then back to it the next day because people are counting on you. Um, but I think the biggest thing that we have to do is get on the ground. We have to talk to people that we have not talked to in the past. We're seeing approval ratings for Congress, for Donald Trump being, I mean, abysmal, right? If we talk to these folks in the right way, if we talk to them about our farmers getting screwed over while $40 billion is being sent to another country for their farmers, I think we can get some of these people back to voting on the issues that we care about. And that's, you know, if I get one of those a week, I feel good about it. Um, and I struggle with that even with my own family, right? My dad's a Republican, but when I sit down with him and talk about issues that he's not an expert on, um, we can have a real conversation. And I think that's where we need to get back to, and not the name calling or the using their tactics against them necessarily. While it's funny uh, in the moment, it doesn't really dial down the temperature and doesn't really allow us to build relationships with people.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like one of the things that happened over the kind of arc of the past 10 years was that the left was even pointing a lot of that ire to its own, right? Like there was kind of this exclusionary, like if you don't speak the lingo, or if you don't know all the language, or if you're not completely on board with X, Y, and Z, that became kind of an exclusionary piece too. And so we kind of boxed ourselves into this very narrow, like here's who we talk to. It's either get on board or peace out, good luck. And that's not a winning strategy electorally, right? Like it might make us feel good for ourselves, but it's not how you win electoral and political power, right? And so I hear you on.
Especially right now in South Carolina.
Mhm,
Like, maybe in 10, 15 years it'll be different, but right
yeah.
now we have to talk to people who have historically voted in the Republican Party primaries.
Hmm. Yeah. And, work that you did in 2024 talking to people who just don't historically vote, right? Like getting people off the sidelines and engaged. It just strikes me in so many of these elections that we've seen over 2025, a lot of the winning came from engaging voters who just don't even feel spoken to by either party, right? And there's a large opportunity, I would think, in South Carolina to do a lot of that too, just because, like I said with Ross Turner, right? Like he's had no reason to actually get on the ground level and talk to people who aren't normally kind of engaged. And so that just feels like a big opening, an opportunity for us to make our government stronger, right? Like is competing, talking to as many people as possible, getting on the ground, and having real conversations with people, not just kind of online, right, spats, or even online. Like I posted this really cool Instagram graphic and it's getting lots of fire, right? That's not the same kind of engagement that we're talking about either. And a lot of what you're talking about is a lost art, I feel, and takes a certain amount of inner work to be able to show up to a conversation with your dad, for example, kind of holding your own composure, speaking your truth, but in ways that honor who he is and his own perspectives, and trying to come to a place of like, where do we understand and agree? And people just aren't doing a whole lot of that these days.
Percent. And I think Donald Trump has had a lot to do with that, but I think we have to get back to where we were. I protested George W. Bush out in front of the State House on Gervais Street when, in 2004. Back to that time where we could at least have conversation. And, as someone who has been a victim of, death threats and those types of things increasingly over the last couple of years, um, I try to tell folks, hey, we can be passionate, um, but we need to tone down some of the rhetoric.
So as we turn to our close, Phil, I just wonder what kind of piece or pieces of advice you would give to folks across South Carolina as we head into 2026. What should we be doing? Where should we find hope and inspiration? And how should we keep ourselves kind of stepping up and moving forward?
Yeah, find your space. Whether that's donating, whether that's making phone calls, whether that's showing up at a town hall. All of those things are extremely important and um, are worthy of your time. Pay extra close attention to sestatehouse.gov and the app, the SE Legislature app. It's really user friendly where you can watch session and all of the committee meetings on the app. Um, and I think it's I think it's heavy what we're doing and what we're going through right now. But if more people show up, the lift is lighter for everyone. So find your space, and if you don't know where your space could even be, find me on social media, the Ford and Ford group, and I'll try to help lead you to an organization or group that you care about.
Thank you. Phil is being very genuine when he says that. There has never been a time where I have reached out to him and have not gotten a response back that's been incredibly helpful and productive. So, Phil, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. As you may know, the podcast was named after a piece of writing by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Letters to a Young Activist in Troubled Times. And at the end of that, she says, something to the effect about great ships in harbor are incredible, but that's not what great ships are built for. They're built for navigating and for going out on the waters and for being in the seas and the trenches. And so, you, my friend, are an incredibly great ship. I really appreciate all the work you do, that you would inspire me every day. And I can't wait to see what work you continue to do in 2026.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you.